When the rent was late, I never imagined how quickly desperation could turn into temptation. I had always thought of myself as someone who could handle struggle with dignity, someone who would never compromise values no matter the situation. But when the notices kept coming and my landlord's voice grew sharper with every reminder, I realized I was standing at a crossroad. My partner was too distracted to notice how sleepless I had become. Bills piled on the table, unanswered calls from the utility company buzzed on my phone, and all I could think about was how close we were to losing the little roof above our heads. He told me not to worry, that things would somehow work out, but he never offered a plan. Each day I felt more alone in the weight I carried. The knock on the door that evening carried a heaviness I couldn't ignore. My landlord stood there, polite but direct. He mentioned the overdue rent, his voice calm, almost rehearsed, but his eyes lingered longer than necessary. He didn't threaten, not in the traditional sense. Instead, he offered what he called a solution. His words were carefully chosen, soft enough to mask their meaning, sharp enough to pierce through my denial. He said he understood how hard times could get, that sometimes people needed help in ways money couldn't provide. I knew instantly what he meant, though he never said it directly. My face burned with shame, and yet, for a fleeting second, relief flickered inside me. I tried to laugh it off, pretended I didn't catch the implication. But he leaned in just enough to confirm that I had. "Think about it," he said before leaving. The air in the room thickened with his suggestion, and I sat frozen, torn between disgust and a strange, unwelcome curiosity. My partner came home later that night, tired and uninterested in conversation. He didn't notice the silence in me, didn't ask why I couldn't look him in the eye. I wanted to tell him everything, to share the twisted offer that had been placed before me, but the words stayed locked in my throat. As the hours passed, my mind replayed the landlord's expression. It wasn't cruelty I saw, it was confidence. Confidence that someone in my position would eventually surrender. I hated that part of me wondered if he was right. I hated that survival could make you consider choices you once swore were beneath you. That night I lay awake, listening to my partner snore peacefully beside me, while my thoughts drifted somewhere they shouldn't. The rent wasn't just overdue, it was a ticking clock, and each second pushed me closer to the edge. By the time morning came, I realized I wasn't only fighting poverty anymore. I was fighting myself. I tried to avoid him after that night, convincing myself it was a test of character, that I had passed simply by walking away. But avoiding him wasn't easy. Every time I left the apartment, I felt his presence lurking somewhere nearby, as if he knew the power of the seed he had planted. The overdue rent was no longer just a number on paper, it was a shadow that followed me everywhere. My partner, lost in his own world, failed to notice how withdrawn I had become. He still spoke of plans that never materialized, promised he would get extra hours at work but never did. The gap between his words and reality widened, and with it, the loneliness inside me grew heavier. The landlord seemed to sense this. He started appearing in small, almost innocent ways. A knock to check on a leaky faucet, a comment about the hall lights, a question about whether the heating worked fine. Each encounter carried an undertone, an invisible string pulling me closer to what I knew I shouldn't want. He never repeated his offer outright, but the suggestion lived in his pauses, in the smirk that formed when he caught me hesitating. I told myself he was a predator, taking advantage of someone's vulnerability, but what unsettled me most was how part of me craved the attention. It wasn't love, and it wasn't romance. It was something else, something built on survival and the intoxicating idea of being wanted, even if it was for the wrong reasons. I began comparing his attentiveness to my partner's absence. While my partner scrolled his phone, detached and distracted, the landlord looked me directly in the eye, as if I mattered. That contrast gnawed at me. I despised myself for noticing it, but desire and shame often walk hand in hand. The more the rent deadline approached, the clearer the choice became. My nights were restless, torn between imagining the humiliation of eviction and the guilt of surrendering to temptation. I told myself I could find another job, sell some belongings, maybe even borrow money, but none of those solutions arrived quickly enough. He knew this. That's why he didn't push. He let time do the convincing, watching me weaken with every passing day. The breaking point came when I overheard my partner making excuses again, brushing off the urgency as if eviction was just a word. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him until he understood the danger we were in, but I bit my tongue. Something inside me broke in that silence. I realized I was no longer waiting for him to step up. I was already preparing to step into something I swore I never would. When the landlord stopped me in the hallway one evening, his tone casual, his words laced with the same unspoken promise, I didn't walk away this time. I didn't agree, but I didn't refuse either. And in that pause, that hesitation, I knew the line between right and wrong had already blurred. The night it finally happened wasn't planned, at least not in the way I imagined such moments would unfold. I had told myself countless times that I wouldn't cross that line, that temptation didn't equal action. But desperation has a way of stripping away pride until all that's left is a choice between two wrongs. The rent deadline had arrived. The notices were sharper, the fear heavier, and my partner was still blind to how close we were to losing everything. When the landlord came by that evening, his tone wasn't stern or cruel. Instead, it was soft, almost tender, as though he was offering comfort rather than corruption. That contrast disarmed me more than any threat could have. I let him inside, not because I wanted him there, but because I didn't have the strength to resist anymore. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until he stepped closer. My heart raced, my mind screamed for me to push him away, but my body betrayed me. His hands carried a confidence that told me this wasn't his first time manipulating desperation. And yet, as much as I hated to admit it, part of me leaned into it. The touch felt like an escape from the storm I had been drowning in. For the first time in weeks, someone was looking at me as if I mattered, as if my presence had weight. Every kiss, every touch was tangled with conflict. Guilt clawed at me even as my body surrendered to the moment. I thought of my partner, of the trust one was breaking, and still I didn't stop. The landlord whispered things I can't repeat, promises wrapped in heat and sin, words that blurred the edges of my conscience. I wanted to believe it was just a transaction, a desperate trade to buy time, but in the haze of that night it felt like more. Wrong, forbidden, intoxicating. Each sensation twisted into the next until I couldn't separate survival from desire. When it was over, silence returned, heavier than before. He left with a look of satisfaction, a quiet assurance that this wouldn't be the last time. I stood there trembling, disgusted with myself, yet unable to deny the strange pull I still felt. Shame wrapped around me like a second skin. I showered until the water ran cold, scrubbing at my body as if I could erase what had just happened. But no amount of cleansing could wash away the truth. Later that night, when my partner held me close, I nearly broke down. His arms felt familiar, safe, and yet they also felt foreign, as if I no longer deserved them. He spoke softly about the future, about how things would eventually get better, completely unaware of what I had just done to us. My guilt was suffocating, but I swallowed it, forcing myself to smile in the dark. I told myself it was a one-time mistake, something I would bury and never repeat. But deep down, I already knew secrets like this don't stay buried. They linger, waiting to rise again. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night never loosened its grip. At first, I convinced myself it had been a one-time lapse, a desperate act I could lock away and forget. But forgetting wasn't possible. Every time I saw him in the hallway, every time his eyes lingered on me with that knowing look, I felt the weight of what I had done pressing harder against my chest. He didn't demand more from me at once, he didn't have to. His silence was enough. It reminded me that he now held a piece of me I could never take back. The first reminder came casually, almost cruelly disguised as kindness. He mentioned the rent, waved his hand, and told me not to worry. That gesture should have been a relief, but it felt like a chain tightening around my neck. He had no intention of letting me forget. The debt wasn't erased, it had simply been transformed into something darker, something that tied me to him in ways money never could. From that moment, I understood. He wasn't just my landlord anymore. He was a shadow that lived in every corner of my home. My partner began noticing changes in me. He asked why I seemed distant, why I flinched at his touch or turned away from his gaze. I blamed stress, exhaustion, anything but the truth. Every lie I told stacked higher inside me, and still, I couldn't bring myself to confess. I wanted to, but the shame was unbearable. How could I explain that the roof over our heads was secured at a price I prayed he would never discover? His trust in me was the last piece of innocence I had left, and even that felt like it was slipping away. The worst part wasn't the guilt, it was the temptation that followed. I told myself I hated what had happened, but in quiet moments, when my mind wandered, I remembered the thrill of being wanted, the dangerous intimacy of surrendering. Survival had been my excuse the first time, but what excuse would I have if it happened again? I hated that the question even lived inside me. I hated that the line I had once vowed never to cross no longer existed. It didn't take long before it happened again. One late night, another knock, another moment of weakness. I told myself it was still survival, that I was still doing it for us, but deep down I knew I had already given in to more than desperation. I had allowed the danger to consume me. Each time I promised myself it was the last, but each time I returned. What began as a transaction had transformed into a trap I could no longer escape. Now, when I look at my partner, I see not the person I once loved with pure devotion, but the reminder of everything I've destroyed. The rent was paid, yes, but the true cost was far greater. It wasn't just my loyalty I lost. It was the part of myself that believed I was immune to temptation. And that part, once gone, never comes back. The rent was late, and in paying it, I paid with my soul.